Yep, no doubt about it, I'm lost. And I couldn't be happier. So, Westworld Season 2. Let's get into that a little bit here. I'm going to try to stay as spoiler-free as possible with regards to this because it's still a very intriguing show, and if you followed the first season and that hooked you in, I believe the second season has plenty of worthwhile investing surprises for you to stick around for and not have those moments ruined for you by a silly old reviewer here. I was genuinely curious about where they were going to go after the gigantic kind of finale they placed themselves in with Season 1. And the one thing I was kind of wondering about when it came to returning to the series was the gimmick of the time jumps. Because as you found out in the first season, the show plays very, very loose with continuity, or at least with regards to the timeline. One moment you'll be in what is assumed to be present day, the next you'll be in a scene that feels a little bit off and you're not entirely sure why, then it turns out that that was actually the present day and that was the past, and so on and so forth. Narratives that are running parallel to each other. You're not entirely sure like what the actual like orientation or chronology is, and if those events are actually running parallel to each other, if it is something that happened in the past with regards to the park, if it's just another kind of delusion or programming delusion brought on due to someone being a host. So I was wondering how they were going to be able to keep that narrative going as we entered into Season 2, now that it was all kind of laid out there on the table as to, okay, the hosts have become self-aware, here's where they turn on their masters, so to speak, and all-out chaos breaks out across the park. And I gotta say, Season 2 kept me invested with a fair share of its mystery, but also with a lot of its payoffs, surprisingly. You very much feel the Nolan influence stronger here from Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy than probably from the producing standpoint with J.J. Abrams, in that they opened up new questions, but paid off some of them with some fairly satisfying answers. And I honestly can't assess Season 2 as being superior to Season 1, because they are completely different animals at this point. Season 1 was all about getting you acclimated to this idea of what Westworld was, of the park, getting you used to the idea of what these hosts are and what they're capable of. Season 2 goes down several different rabbit holes and takes some of these concepts that you felt you got a firm grip on and understood a little bit and bends them very well. And you could argue that that does make it sort of an improvement over the previous season, is that it's taking the established mythos and just expanding it further. But then there are moments where it will take you to some places you weren't thinking would fit into the aesthetic of Westworld. So that's what I kind of mean in the fact that these two seasons seem like almost completely different shows at certain points. The one thing I do appreciate about this Season 2 is that no matter where you are in the narrative, whether it is taking place in the present or whether it is taking place in what you perceive to be the past, it's still a pretty small time frame. And I feel that's what places Westworld kind of above current run of Game of Thrones, is with regards to it knows how to structure out its time periods, so to speak. The last season of Game of Thrones was only 7 episodes and was so truncated that grand sweeping narratives feel very short. They feel very brief, and people are able to convene with one another and form alliances faster than they would in previous seasons in that show, just because of the time constraint in the episode number. Here, the premise is set up that this is basically, you go into the season with the idea of cleanup operation already in place. Delos has kind of swept in, is trying to rein in control of the park, and so it's not necessarily a narrative that's going to be covering a time period in years or even decades. It's just covering this little moment in time where the park is out of control and they're just trying to reestablish control. So that works in this season's favor very well, is that even though they can still play fast and loose with time and with the placement of certain scenes and moments, it's still on a schedule and on a clock that you can keep track of a little bit easier than probably in the first season. Oh, let's talk about time is really making my head hurt a little bit with regards to this show. So let's talk about the acting. Everyone has really elevated their game here. Thandie Newton and Jeffrey Wright especially are kind of the standouts to me in this second season. Thandie Newton at one point establishes almost an omnipresent type of ability, and she plays that very well as both this host who is somewhat aware of the control and power she can have, but has vulnerable and frightening moments to herself. And she still follows that narrative and that through line of her daughter. I need to stop saying narrative because they say narrative a lot in this show and it's going to confuse me even more. So she's given a lot of moments in this season to really show off what she can do with regards to playing the emotional, vulnerable mother, but also this stoic badass. And definitely when her narrow's story takes her to a place that was hinted at in the last season, that's when she really gets to shine. Jeffrey Wright as Bernard is very... There's a lot that he's doing in his performance where he is having literal and figurative internal conflicts, and he's able to just sell you on the agony and pain that this guy is going through with regards to new reveals, with regards to new information he has to absorb, again, literally and figuratively. I'm just in awe of the guy's ability to, through all that, maintain that gruff Jeffrey Wright type commanding tone. Like, no matter what he's going through, He's got more of an Eastwood voice in a Western-based drama than the actual Eastwoodish characters. So, good on you, Jeffrey Wright. Evan Rachel Wood was very much one of the big focal points of the first season, and I feel in the second season, she had to take sort of a back seat at times to characters like Maeve and Bernard. But when Dolores is doing her thing of basically leading the host resistance, or what is perceived as being the host resistance, she plays that cold, calculating, disillusioned role really well. Like, this is no longer like fragile farmer's daughter Dolores. She is fully wide awake of the world she's in and what's been done to her. So she is on a warpath, and just her stone face at times when having to interact with either her subordinates or with any humans she comes across, it can be kind of chilling. I'm so glad they gave James Marsden a lot more to do as Teddy. I had a feeling that's what they were going to do, was that you had to kind of show what a kind of weak and pathetic starting point his character was coming from before in the next season they kind of buff him up a little bit and give him his own story arc with a very heartbreaking finale. I won't lie, in the season finale this year, his final scene, like, a little bit of a tear came to my eye in that moment, because I'm like, you know what? I really didn't care much for Teddy in the first season, but he has a good payoff in season 2. So I'm so glad you got a character with some depth to it and not just a guy who gets cuckolded by another dude. Cyclops, Perry White's son, that dude in the Notebook that I haven't seen, but I just know him as being that dude in the Notebook who loses to Ryan Gosling. Sorry, dude, but glad Westworld's worked out for you so far. A lot of the side characters and supporting players who really didn't get a lot of screen time in season 1, this time around they're given a lot more to do. Tessa Thompson comes to mind especially. And it's going to be a major 180 for anyone who comes out of Thor Ragnarok and sees her as this jaded but fun-loving hero in Valkyrie, and then all of a sudden you see her be the most manipulative corporate lapdog ever in this show. She really is able to hold her own against a lot of big dominating personalities in the Delos Corp. Ed Harris is really good this season as well. He's given a little bit more of his quest to go through the maze, and that leads to quite a bit of madness from the looks of things. And honestly, his last scene in the season finale kind of spoilers here, but stick around after the credits for the season finale if you haven't seen it yet. There is a post-credits scene for a TV show now. Okay. His last scene, it did leave me scratching my head a little bit because I was like, okay, his arc in the last couple of episodes, I don't know, it flip-flops from going into fake-out territory to going into, definitely territory to going back into fake-out and back and forth and back and forth. I feel like they were still doing that right up until the last second of the show. Overall, there's a lot of surprises in store for you this season. There are a lot of opportunities for some colorful supporting players to play more prominent roles this time around. Some of the new characters, or at least the characters that didn't get a fully established storyline in the first season, you invest in quite a bit. This show really makes you reflect on humanity, on what it means to be human. I know that's probably been said a dozen times over in many other reviews, much more articulate than mine. It goes without saying, this show, for all of its oddity, for all of its bending and breaking of time and traditional storytelling structure, it is able to give you a lot of really good emotional high points and relatable moments for humans and hosts alike. Now, here's where I feel at the very end of the season finale, I'm not entirely sure what I want from this show now. The way this show ends for this season is kind of the way I felt a little bit about the last season of Sherlock. I don't know if I want them to continue from here. I know more Westworld can be a really good thing, but I'm one of those people where I feel there are certain stories, especially science fiction stories, where leaving things on a very ambiguous note can be a very fulfilling ending in and of itself. I know that doesn't sit well with a lot of people out there. I know I'm kind of the odd man when it comes to things like that. A lot of people want questions further answered. They want to know every little facet of this fantasy world that's been established. But the way they paced this season and the way this season finale kind of built up to a certain point, there was a ringing sense of finality about the route a lot of the character stories went. And at the very end of it, even though there is a post-credits stinger, part of me is thinking, I don't know, this would be just kind of a perfect ending. Leave some things up in the air. I don't know how much more I want to know. Now, if it comes back for a third season and, you know what, it answers some of those questions that are left hanging and there's a pretty satisfactory or cool twist to those answers, sure, I'm all for that. Part of me just felt a little like, yeah, this feels like an ending. This definitely feels like a finale, more so than just a season finale, like an actual story finale. And I don't know, that kind of makes me a little yep, I'm lost, and I couldn't be happier. Fidelity.